small town outside of Fort Worth, Texas, a truck driver leaves home, never to return. Authorities suspect something is terribly wrong. Weeks pass as forensic investigators search for even the smallest clues, only to find what they feared in their own backyard. In Canada, 2 people die suddenly of unknown causes, and their deaths may not be as coincidental as they first appear. But a mixture of intuition and science leads detectives on a journey to uncover the deadly answers half a world away. Perpetrators try to disguise their actions to avoid prosecution. Yet forensic investigators, using advanced techniques, can uncover their crimes, revealing the silent killers. In this episode, some of the names have been changed. Graham, Texas, lies in the grasslands just west of Fort Worth. The quaint cowboy town, surrounded by cattle and horse ranches, has a down-home family feel, where picturesque scenery rarely doubles as a crime scene. On January 20th, 1996, the Young County Sheriff's Office received a call from T.J. Ryan's parents.
Do you need police, fire, or ambulance?
Their son was missing, and they were concerned. The 6-foot 6-inch, 300-pound, 27-year-old man had disappeared into thin air.
Wednesday. He's been missing since Wednesday.
Okay, does he have a girlfriend?
TJ's mother informed police that her son worked as a long-haul trucker transporting cattle.
She said that they had an argument.
She was worried because he had not reported to work for several days.
I don't believe that because he would have come tonight.
Young County Sheriff Kerry Pettis was the first to look into TJ's whereabouts. Sheriff Pettis knew most of the county's citizens, so he was acquainted with the easygoing trucker.
He was a good person. He was a young man that rodeoed, drove cattle trucks, helped gather cattle. He just worked around agriculture all his life. Was the same as any young person is. Always wore a big hat, always wore boots, generally speaking.
Since it was out of character for TJ to miss work without checking in, police hoped his employer might have some information about his whereabouts.
How many years?
TJ's boss told him his girlfriend, Helen Moore, had phoned a few days earlier, explaining he was too sick to come in to work.
Because he lives with his girlfriend.
So we began the process of following up. Did he have girlfriends? Did he have a drug habit? Where could he have gone?
The sheriff put out a missing persons report to the surrounding areas in hopes of some news about the missing trucker.
On Monday, we began, as word got out in the community, we began getting hundreds of calls of, well, I saw him here. I think he went there. So on and so forth. And those things had to all be run down, and it was very time-consuming.
The sheriff met with Chief Deputy Gary Barnett to discuss the case. He also called in Texas Ranger Marshall Brown, who worked for the district attorney's office handling special cases. Together, they focused on finding T.J. Ryan. Since T.J.'s boss said Helen Moore called in sick on her boyfriend's behalf, Ranger Brown and Deputy Barnett decided to pay her a visit. Helen and TJ lived together on a small ranch where they kept some livestock and a few horses.
Gary Barnett, Chief Deputy, Young County Sheriff's Department.
The couple had been involved for over 5 years.
Talk to us.
Sure.
Helen told the officers that she and TJ were arguing over finances.
About 4 days ago.
She said he stormed out of the house and she hadn't seen him since.
Shirt, I think.
She told Ranger Brown this wasn't the first time something like this had happened.
He always comes back, though. He'll be back.
At the house, Ranger Brown noticed what appeared to be bloodstains on the front porch. Helen became agitated and quickly explained that a stray dog had attacked their pet pot-bellied pig.
Yeah, the blood's from our pig.
The pig's wounds were so severe that he could not be saved. She asked her son to shoot it.
Where's the pig at?
Helen then told the officers that she had placed the carcass in a horse trailer.
Do you mind if we...
Ranger Brown wanted to look around inside.
I don't mind.
Would you go with us?
Sure.
Okay.
Although everything appeared to be in order, one thing caught his eye. He noticed the floor. It looked as if the carpet had been removed.
I took it out and burned it.
Helen said the carpet was one of the things she and TJ were arguing over.
He was complaining how messy the house was. What is the problem?
She said he yelled at her because the carpet was filthy and that she was a bad housekeeper. She wanted to make him happy, so she tore it up and took it outside. She explained that the carpeting was too heavy to drag to the side of the road, so she thought it would be easier to burn it.
Yeah, why don't you clean the house up once in a while?
Was there something on the carpet that you didn't want us to see?
Well, no, I don't care if y'all saw it. We had the
Helen
pig.
denied any wrongdoing.
It was messy from the pig. He was complaining
She simply was
about
getting rid of some old
screaming
carpet.
about how messy the carpet was, so I just took it outside and burned it.
Investigators had come up empty at the ranch. They were no closer to finding TJ Ryan. But that was about to change. In neighboring Palo Pinto County, a resident of the Possum Lake area called authorities. He saw what he believed to be a deer carcass shot by poachers hiding on his land. Constable Noah Bragg was dispatched to the scene. He was horrified by what he saw in the scrubby prairie grass.
1156 Palo Pinto, we're going to need the sheriff and the investigator here, please. We've got human remains.
Hello?
Constable Bragg reported the torso was that of a large white male.
Okay, we'll be on our way. Be there in a minute. Marshal, we gotta go.
Barnett and Brown immediately left for the crime scene, fearing their missing person case had now become a murder. When they arrived, Palo Pinto police had already roped off the area. Investigators noticed something strange right away. There wasn't a large amount of blood around the torso. Given the severity of the dismemberment, officers speculated that the victim had most likely been killed somewhere else and then dumped in the grass. Further examination of the torso revealed even more clues. They believed whoever cut up this body knew something about anatomy. The legs and buttocks had been removed at the joint. The hands were detached at the wrists in the same manner. The victim's head and neck were also missing. Investigators noticed an abrasion around the victim's waist. Ranger Brown had several initial theories.
In a drug-related crime, they do dismember bodies to keep the body from being identified. And in this case, that's what it appeared to be in.
The torso was removed and sent to the coroner's office for an autopsy. Investigators would have to wait for DNA tests before they would know if, in fact, this was the body of T.J. Ryan. In Young County, Texas, a trucker named T.J. Ryan was reported missing. A few days later, a dismembered torso was discovered in a remote field in nearby Palo Pinto County. Investigators speculated the gruesome murder might be a result of a drug deal gone bad. And now they waited for DNA results in the hopes of making a positive identification to see if, in fact, it was the missing trucker. At the scene, investigators gathered more clues. They noticed coastal Bermuda hay, a commonly used stock feed, around the torso. Smears of manure were present, as were prickly pear needles. They collected these samples for further analysis. Texas Ranger Brown and his team found other peculiar clues.
There was a black plastic bag laying next to the torso. Also, there was a piece of wood that was found at the scene that had red paint on it, which appeared that the vehicle had ran over and maybe the paint from the vehicle was on the wood. And that was basically the physical evidence that was at the scene.
Officers noticed tire impressions in the loose soil. There were two separate and distinct sets of tire tracks. It appeared as if a truck pulling a trailer had driven up near the torso. While the soil was too powdery to obtain imprint samples, the officers documented the size and characteristics of the tire treads. They also measured the tracks to determine the turning radius of the vehicle. At the Dallas County Medical Examiner's office, the torso was processed. Pathologists made a detailed report of the victim's wounds. They determined that a knife or a fine-tooth saw was used to dismember the body. They also believed the abrasion across the victim's waist was caused by a rope. DNA samples were collected to help determine if, in fact, this was the body of T.J. Ryan. They were sent out for analysis. Investigators also sent the biological samples to the lab for further toxicology screenings in hopes of proving their drug theory. But what the lab proved shocked even the most seasoned investigators. The lab report informed Sheriff Pettis there were fatal levels of morphine in the victim's body. But no one knew whose torso they were investigating. The answer lay deep within the body's DNA, but the test results were days away. Investigators continued to search for other body parts and additional evidence. Search and rescue teams combed the surrounding areas where the torso was found. Forensic cadaver dogs, specially trained to alert on human remains, were also called in to aid in the search. Despite this effort, no further evidence was found. At the Torrance County Medical Examiner's office, senior forensic DNA analyst Carolyn Van Winkle used a reverse paternity test to make a positive identification on T.J. Ryan. Sheriff Pettis was now officially heading up a murder investigation. And he decided to go back to the last known person who saw T.J. Ryan alive, his girlfriend, Helen Moore. He needed answers. Sheriff Pettis wanted to take another look at the ranch. He was particularly interested in the blood on the porch, which Moore said came from an injured pig. Crime scene investigators took samples of the blood. Since Helen said she transported the pig in the horse trailer, Pettis moved it to the impound lot. Investigators would make a more detailed inspection at the police lab.
This is Carolyn Van
Carolyn Van Winkle examined the blood
I have
samples
those
taken from the porch.
threshold sample for you. That blood came back to be pig blood. It wasn't human.
Van Winkle's test confirmed the
Okay.
sample taken from the porch was in
I'll talk
fact
to you later.
from a
Thank
pig.
you.
It appeared that Helen Moore was not lying. But investigators were still not convinced she was telling the whole truth. They believed she was holding back something. They just didn't know what it was. The Young County forensic team examined the truck and trailer taken from Helen's ranch. They discovered prickly pine needles embedded in the tires. Investigators collected samples in order to compare it to similar plant material found where the torso had been left. Knowing horse manure was also present near the remains, they also gathered manure samples. Inside the samples were visible specks of red that appeared to be chips of paint. They were sent to the lab for analysis. Once again, Vi Hummel Carr brought in a cadaver dog to determine if a human body was transported in the trailer.
We were requested to do an evidence search of the trailer to see if we could determine if there was any blood or tissue from the victim. I started out doing a perimeter search of the trailer with Mercy, and then we went inside the trailer where she alerted on the floorboards.
The dog confirmed what investigators were beginning to suspect.
The blood was found in the trailer boards and on the axles of the trailer. It had dripped down through the cracks in the boards and come to rest on the axles.
Investigators sent the boards to the lab to see if the blood was human or if it came from the dead pig Helen's son had placed in the trailer. Given that red paint flecks were found in the manure next to the torso, they also extracted paint samples for further analysis. The truck and trailer's turning radius was compared to the calculations taken at the crime scene. Investigators determined that Helen's truck and trailer could have been at the crime scene, but definitive proof was needed. Nothing tied her directly to the murder. Investigators went back to those closest to TJ. Sheriff Pettis looked into Helen Moore's finances.
Hey, let me see. Hey, Gary, come here and look at this.
The most alarming piece of information was the fact that Helen Moore had recently taken out a $150,000 insurance policy on the life of her boyfriend, TJ Ryan.
Nobody has that kind of claims history.
Investigators now believe they were closer to a suspect.
There's your motive.
If they ever hoped to make an arrest, they needed the science to back up their suspicions. At the forensic lab, Dr. Tam Garland examined the paint scrapings taken from the floorboards of the trailer. They compared these to the red paint flecks embedded in the manure where the torso had been found.
We have found what we believe are red paint chips inside the fecal pads. And so he actually retrieved paint chips from the trailer for us, and we could lay them side by side and match up the different colors. You could match up the colors layer for layer in the chips that he sent us as well as in the chips that we found from the cows. So in our mind, that's pretty much reduces the probability that it's from any other trailer or from any other source.
Dr. Garland determined the cow had eaten the paint chips found in the grass and passed them. Helen's trailer had been at the scene. Forensic examiner Carolyn Van Winkle extracted blood samples from the trailer floorboards. Her analysis revealed the presence of two distinct blood types.
In the trailer, there was samples obtained from the floorboards of the trailer and samples obtained from under those floorboards in the axle of the trailer. Those samples were submitted to the laboratory, and on each one of those samples, human blood was identified, and also pig blood was identified.
Further DNA analysis confirmed that the human blood belonged to T.J. Ryan. Sheriff Pettis now had definitive proof that the trailer on Helen Moore's property had transported Ryan's body. He had the evidence he needed to secure an arrest warrant. Helen Moore was arrested and charged with murder. But Sheriff Pettis still needed corroborating evidence that would confirm exactly what had happened. He obtained a search warrant, and his team began a detailed examination of Helen and TJ's ranch house. Investigators used luminol testing to check for blood. It became quickly apparent that Moore had used bleach to scrub the house, erasing any residual surface stains. Any evidence that placed the murder in her home appeared to be gone. Yet when a cadaver dog was brought in, it alerted on evidence the luminol testing could not pick up. This just might be the link detectives needed that would firmly establish where and how the murder took place.
Yeah, I'll see what you got here.
Detectives in Young County, Texas had apprehended Helen Moore, charging her with the murder of her boyfriend, T.J. Ryan.
Take her, put her in jail.
His torso had been found in a remote area, and forensic investigators learned he had toxic levels of morphine in his system. Police discovered TJ's blood in a horse trailer found on Moore's property. Detectives believed Moore had scrubbed her house with bleach, and luminol testing could not reveal exactly where the murder took place. Once again, Vi Hummel Carr brought in a cadaver dog to help find what investigators were looking for.
Inside the Moore residence, Mercy alerted on blood evidence by the rear door, where apparently the body had been dragged through the house. She trailed from the master bedroom through the hallway and into the boys' room, just the way the body had been dragged through the house.
The dog had sensed something underneath a carpet threshold strip. Investigators removed the carpet strip to examine it further in the lab. Inside the residence, they also found prescription bottles of morphine. Pettis learned later that Helen's former husband had cancer. The drug had been prescribed as a painkiller. At the lab, the blood samples taken from the carpet strip were analyzed. The blood was T.J. Ryan's. Sheriff Pettis was now convinced Helen Moore murdered T.J. Ryan inside their home for the insurance money. He confronted her with a possible motive.
She was wanting to purchase another horse and wanted to borrow the money again to do this, and he said no. And I think that may have been the trigger that really set her off. I think she was probably going to do it all along, but I think that set her off.
But Helen admitted nothing. Finally, Pettis showed her the evidence his team had collected. He told her that given these irrefutable facts, the district attorney would seek the death penalty. Realizing her crime had been revealed, Helen Moore told the sheriff what had transpired that fateful night. TJ complained of back pain, and Helen suggested he take some morphine. She gave him a lethal dose. With her kids away at school, Helen proceeded to get rid of the body. But because TJ was over 300 pounds, it would be impossible for her to drag him outside by herself. So she wrapped a lariat around his waist and attached it to the hitch on her pickup. She then proceeded to pull the body out of the house and up into the trailer. Moore, who had experienced butchering animals, then cut up the body in the trailer and discarded the parts over 3 counties. Helen Moore was convicted of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison and will not be eligible for parole for 30 years. Some find their prey and methods of murder close to home. Other perpetrators travel far and wide to uncover the perfect silent killer. Hamilton, Ontario sits on the northern shores of Lake Ontario. This Canadian city is home to an international population. And in 1996, authorities would discover an exotic method of murder. John Pierce, an insurance investigator, went to the home of Natraj Sukhwinder, a native of India. Pierce needed some additional information to process a recent life insurance claim. As he got out of his car, Pierce felt as if he'd been at this location before. Ranjit Kela, his client, had died a few weeks ago of a heart attack and named Mr. Sukhwinder the beneficiary of his $100,000 life insurance policy.
Hello. Sir. Yes, I'm John Pierce. I'm the insurance.
Both men purchased policies naming the other as beneficiary in the event of their deaths.
Thank you. This way, sir. Yes, ma'am. I'd like to ask you a few
Sukhwinder told the agent that Ranjit was his nephew and that the young man had lived with him. Pierce was confused. Ranjit's driver's license listed a different address.
Oh, he's my nephew.
Sukhwinder explained that the address was his brother's and that his nephew spent time at both houses. Pierce left the documents with Sukhwinder, who said his brother was in India and he would have him clear up any discrepancies once he returned. As Pierce drove away, something about the case still bothered him. Back at his office, Pierce asked his assistant to pull Sukhwinder's file. As he went through the information, Pierce remembered Sukhwinder had filed another life insurance claim only 16 months earlier. The claim was for Sukhwinder's wife, Priya. She too had died suddenly. Instinctively, he called the Hamilton police. Detective Warren Corral was the lead investigator. Kevin Dinsa, a native of India who spoke fluent Punjabi, was also assigned to the case.
I've interviewed the beneficiary.
The fact that two claims were filed in such a relatively short period of time and were purchased by the same individual raised serious concerns.
I understand that you represent two separate insurance.
Detective Corral was very suspicious.
That's why I contacted you.
Both of the people that died had similar symptomology to their deaths. They were young people who had no medical history.
The report indicated that Priya had complained of headaches for several weeks before her death. She was taking a homeopathic remedy to help alleviate the pain. One day, she suddenly collapsed. Her husband, Natraj Sukhwinder, found her and immediately called 911. Doctors could not revive her, and she lapsed into a coma.
Do you really want to go through with this?
4 days later, at her husband's request, her life support was removed, and she died. Dr. David King performed the autopsy on Priya. He was somewhat puzzled by what he found.
Post-mortem showed really a swollen brain, of brain death. And that was about the only significant finding at post-mortem. There was no actual indication of why she had collapsed, no underlying disease process that I could identify at that time.
The hospital drug screen found no trace of street drugs. Cause of death was ruled undetermined. Sukhwinder had his wife's remains cremated and sent back to India. Unfortunately, the autopsy did not provide the answers Detective Corral had hoped for. He decided to look into Sukhwinder's past. A search in the Canadian criminal database revealed that Sukhwinder was arrested for domestic violence. He had hit Priya. He paid a fine and was released. Detectives Corral and Dinsa decided to look into Sukhwinder's nephew's death. They began by visiting Ranjit's widow to ask about the night her husband died. She explained that Ranjit had friends over that day, including his uncle, Sukhwinder. Ranjit's friends were partying and drinking heavily. But his wife told the detectives Ranjit never drank alcohol, and this night was no exception.
He drank.
She remembered when the guests left, he had complained of a backache and took some pills to alleviate the pain. As he was getting ready for bed, he collapsed. She said she called an ambulance as her husband convulsed on the floor.
Hello?
Ranjit died in the emergency room. The official cause of death? Heart failure.
Well, thank you for the information.
Although his death was ruled a heart attack, Ranjit, like Priya, the first victim, had experienced severe pain, taken medicine, and collapsed on the floor. The detectives went to see Dr. King at Hamilton General. Dr. King's colleague, Dr. Chitra Rao, overheard the detectives' questions and had particular concerns of her own, given the peculiar cause of death.
We discussed the case, and then he asked me whether I had any suggestion. So then I realized, since both are Indian origin, and I know three common poisonings in India is strychnine, arsenic, and chloroform. So I said maybe we should test for those three agents.
Detective Corral wondered if, in fact, the victims had been given the deadly poison.
Now, these are the...
Dr. King, the forensic pathologist who performed the autopsies, gave Detective Coral the tissue samples from the two victims, Priya Sukhwinder and Ranjit Kela.
Is there anything else?
Coral delivered these to the Center of Forensic Science for further toxicology testing. But they would have to wait for the results. It took time. Given Dr. Rao's concerns, Coral began researching strychnine poisoning. He learned that the plant it comes from is indigenous to India. Because it is used as a pesticide and a homeopathic medicine, the substance is readily available. The toxic chemical is lethal and is banned in Canada. A small amount, 1/40th of a sugar cube, is enough to cause a horrific death.
It's just a terrible, terrible death. You're conscious while this goes on, while you're in these seizures, these state of seizures, and you basically know that there's impending doom. People that have ingested strychnine will say, "I'm going to die, I'm going to die."
Yeah, I'm Warren Coral.
The detectives went to visit the friend who was drinking with Ranjit and Sukhwinder.
We're investigating the... yeah.
Although he said he noticed nothing unusual the night Ranjit died, he did remember Sukhwinder gave his nephew a pill for his back pain. He then told the officers he heard a rumor that Sukhwinder went back to India after his wife Priya died and remarried there. And there was one more startling revelation.
Something is funny because
He also heard his new wife suddenly died, just like Ranjit and Priya. The friend believed Sukhwinder had collected on insurance for this wife as well. 3 people were dead, and a pattern was beginning to emerge. In Hamilton, Ontario, 2 young Indian immigrants died suddenly for no apparent reason. The only link between them, one man, Natraj Sukhwinder, the sole beneficiary of life insurance policies taken out on both victims.
Let me ask you this.
And although there were rumors surrounding Sukhwinder, there was no evidence of any kind.
That's my brother's address.
The one solid lead was the toxicology screenings of the second victim, Ranjit Kela. The presence of a lethal poison, strychnine, was discovered. And although illegal in both the US and Canada, the substance is readily available in Sukhwinder's native India. At the Center of Forensic Science, Dr. Joel Mayer examined the samples taken from both victims. Dr. King had saved blood samples from Ranjit. But because Priya had died nearly 18 months earlier, no blood remained, just small blocks of tissue. Due to the limitations of his equipment, Dr. Mayer could not detect the presence of strychnine in Priya's samples. However, he did find evidence of strychnine in Ranjit's blood sample. While Hamilton investigators now believed the young man was poisoned, proving it was another matter. And linking it to the death of Sukhwinder's wife Priya was nearly impossible. They were convinced they had a killer who could strike again at any moment, and they had hit a dead end, fearful they wouldn't be able to stop him. Given the discovery of the poison, Detectives Coral and Dinsa decided to question Sukhwinder further. The used car dealer was cooperative at first, until they asked him if he had ever heard of the poison strychnine.
Death of Ranjit Kela.
Warren spoke to him in English, and it became progressively worse when some key questions were being asked of him. And that's when I stepped up and told him that I could speak Punjabi and that we could then speak in his mother tongue. And I don't think he was quite prepared for that because you kind of got boxed in with that. And so when I was able to converse, he didn't have much room to back away from the questions at that point.
We're going to come back and chat with him.
Although Sukhwinder said he visited with Ranjit the night he died, he insisted he never gave him a pill for his back pain. When they asked him about his wife, Priya, Sukhwinder became sad.
I want you to think about the questions we've asked. We'll talk to you.
But detectives did not believe his display of emotion was genuine. His evasive answers only heightened their suspicions. But that alone was not enough evidence to hold him. The detectives wanted to check out the rumors surrounding Sukhwinder.
It's about a 10.
For that, they needed to go halfway around the world.
See if he's awake.
Sure.
Coral and Dinsa placed a call to Pierre Carrier, the liaison officer at the Canadian High Commission in New Delhi, asking for information on Sukhwinder's background.
Yes, I am. How were you able to follow up those?
Pierre Carrier sent them a fax from Interpol. The rumors proved to be true. Sukhwinder's past was alarming.
What did he say?
He did remarry, and his new wife died suddenly, just like his first wife, Priya. They also learned he had 2 sons who died mysteriously shortly after they were born. It was possible that Sukhwinder had not only killed another wife, but had also murdered his 2 infant sons as well.
February 16th, 1996.
Kind of confirms that information.
The trip to India also confirmed Sukhwinder had easy access to strychnine, the poison found in his nephew's blood. Dinsa and Coral felt it was imperative that they travel to India to collect more corroborating evidence concerning his other family's death.
We wanted to determine what the cause of the death was and what the circumstances were. We also learned that the second wife that he had married in India gave birth to twin babies who had also died. So we wanted to determine what their cause of death was and what the circumstances were, and what the connection was with all these deaths and marriages that were occurring immediately after the first wife's death.
They learned that the symptoms of the new wife's death were identical to those of Priya and Ranjit's. The detectives also discovered how easy it was to buy strychnine.
Strychnine is indigenous to India. It's a tree called kapilo tree, and it grows in the northeastern part of India, and it's available readily, and mainly used for homeopathic reasons, but it's also available in its raw form, and sometimes it's used to kill animals, so it's quite readily available at some of the organic stores and homeopathic stores in India.
In order to get a conviction in Priya's case, Coral and Dinsa would need definitive proof that the poison was present in her tissue samples. It was their hope that forensic science would provide the link they were missing. Hamilton, Ontario detectives Coral and Dinsa were deep into the investigations of 5 mysterious deaths. They discovered strychnine in the blood of one of the victims and believed the others were poisoned as well. It seemed all the evidence was pointing to one suspect, Natraj Sukhwinder, but linking him to the deadly substance proved difficult. The The detectives contacted world-renowned Dr. Frederick Reeders, a Pennsylvania-based toxicologist who had advanced equipment calibrated to detect the most minute trace elements. Working with only the small tissue block sample obtained from Sukhwinder's wife Priya, Reeders began a painstaking process. Using this method, Reeder was able to determine that a large amount of strychnine was in Priya's system at the time of her death. Coral and Dinsa now had the proof they needed to arrest Sukhwinder for the murders of his nephew and his wife. Despite hours of interrogation, Sukhwinder continued to maintain innocence.
He gave a caution statement again, stating he continued to say that he did not murder these people. He did not murder his first wife. He did not murder Ranjit. The things that were happening in India were all a coincidence.
Coral and Dinsa obtained a search warrant for his house. They discovered several items that supported the case they had pieced together.
Found something here.
They were hoping to find something more substantial to tie him directly to the strychnine.
The search warrant was for strychnine or any literature related to strychnine, and we didn't find either. But what we did find was some mortar and pestles, which wasn't all that uncommon in Indian homes as spices are being ground for their daily consumption. However, it was our theory that raw strychnine, which comes in round brown pestles, was grounded in these mortar and pestles and then either placed in gelatin capsules and given to the victims.
The detectives submitted the evidence they collected to test for the poison. Yet Sukhwinder had covered his tracks. Dr. Mayer found no trace of strychnine. But the fact that these items were in his home, coupled with the other evidence they had compiled, gave the detectives a clear picture of how he carried out the crimes. Sukhwinder knew his wife was taking medication for her headaches. He ground up the strychnine in the mortar and pestle, then replaced the contents of her capsules with the deadly poison. He had also offered Ranjit a remedy for his back. Little did the man know the pills he took were laced with strychnine. In July of 2001, Sukhwinder was convicted of the murder of his wife. He received a life sentence. Later that year, he received an additional life term for the murder of Ranjit Kela.
It was an exhilarating experience. It was a tough fight, and once it was over, it was a very, very big victory for us, and it was a relief. Because of the problems that I've briefly outlined, it was a problem throughout the investigation, throughout the trial. So once we got the conviction, it was a huge relief. Of course, after the second conviction, we were just exhilarated about the whole thing.
Though it may only take a small amount of poison to kill, these toxic chemicals leave a telltale trail only forensic science can trace. And with it, the silent killers come to light, and their heinous crimes become all too clear.